Hello and welcome to Trinity Talk Live, water cooler conversation from a Christian perspective. I'm Ken Coughlin.
And I'm Ben Lander.
And thank you for joining us in our jokingly called our weekly show now. That hasn't been weekly for quite a while. But yeah, we were on a week, then we were off a week because what holiday was it? It was in the spring is Memorial Day, right? Yep. Labor Day's in the fall. Yep. I never wear white anyway, so I didn't need to know the difference. I don't even think that's a fashion thing anymore. I probably completely dated myself. And then last week we were off because our Mary Kay's and my daughter Sarah was graduating from high school, and she has done so. And she is actually working here this summer as a summer intern. She's fixing my close-up right now, so I'm going to assume we're on the wide shot, and I'm just going to look at this camera right here. So she is, in addition to graduating, Sarah is going to be going to college in the fall for mass communication. She's going to be learning about, well, this type of stuff, so she's going to be helping us out here over the summer. And it's also her birthday, so if
Happy
anybody
birthday,
is commenting, we won't sing to you right now. But because I had to get that look. But if anybody is happened to be watching us, whether on Facebook, this should be going on Facebook now too, maybe, I don't know, we'll find out, or on YouTube, we want to leave a happy birthday wishes to Sarah in the comments section. Please feel free to do so. Just make sure you spell it right. She's Sarah with an H. And I won't make the Michael McIntyre skit joke, Sarah, because I know you'll kill me if I do that. So anybody wants to know what I'm talking about, just search up Michael McIntyre on YouTube, and I can't remember what the bit is called. It's like names or something like that. All right, so anyway, hey, thank you very much for joining us here today. And if those of you that are new to the program, what we do is Ben and I sit around the table, and we talk for about 45 minutes to an hour about whatever people out there are talking about, but we always try to do it from a Christian perspective. And as we go through the various topics we're talking about today, we invite you to participate. And the best way you can participate is by commenting in the live chat if you're here on YouTube. Or if Facebook actually is working, we'll be monitoring the Facebook comments as well. And my lovely wife, our producer, Mary Kay, will read to us any comments that are made, any questions you have, things like that, so we can actually interact with you and respond right here on the air. So please feel free if you have any questions, if you think you agree with us, you disagree with us, you think we're completely out to lunch, or maybe there's some other topic that you think is important that you want to ask us a question about, even if it's not something that's on our quote-unquote agenda for the day, put it in the live chat, put it in the comments, and we will be happy to give you our thoughts on it, as long as you don't do it as I'm signing off at the end of the show. So, did I forget anything?
No, I think that all
sums it up. All right. And I did forget something.
Oh.
I did forget something. So we are going to be weekly again. We're going to be back on next week, believe it or not. But Ben really has kind of gotten into this I don't want to come into work this show every week mode. So Ben is not going to be with us next week. We have a special co-host coming on. For those of you that remember, we used to have a show here on the channel called
In the World.
In the World, thank you. Which was more of a strictly news reporting and commentary, whereas this is just whatever kind of show. And one of our regular hosts on that was Greg Durwart. And Greg is going to be filling in for Ben next week here on the show, still live Monday at noon. And then the following week, we have another co-host. Did I tell you that he said yes?
I knew you were still waiting for a reply, so you just told me now.
Yeah, he said yes.
Good.
2 weeks from now, Andrew Kassouf is going to be joining us in his Trinity Joppa channel debut. So Ben will not be with us for the next 2 weeks, but we will be still continue to have the program here. We're just going to have some guests coming in, filling in. So, and
just to clarify, that's not because I just don't want to come on.
I was going to leave it to you to say if you want to say why.
No, there is a reason, and that reason being is that my wife is, in her words, 12 months pregnant. She's very ready for our new baby. Actually, she could come. Actually, he could come any time now. So we're excited for that. So we were just making.
So if Ben runs out in the middle of the show, you'll know why.
Yeah, that's true.
And then that's what interns are for. So we'll have to come up here and fill in. So she's gonna be due any time now. Well, pre-due, I guess, because she's got her due date, but it looks like it's not going to take that long. So
yeah, right.
So, and this will be your third child,
Number
right?
3.
This is when they have to move into the zone defense. You see,
exactly.
We stopped at 2. Mary Kay and I could still do man-to-man. And now Sarah's an adult, so now it's 3-on-1 in our household. So there you go. Like you don't boss your brother around. Come on. All right. Why don't we actually get to what the show's all about? We'll start talking about the stories. Sure. And we're going to move into our first story today. And our first story today comes to us from Christianity Today. The president and CEO of Christianity Today, excuse me, a gentleman by the name of Timothy Dalrymple, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that, has issued a new editorial. And the basic gist of the editorial is that he is saying that churches today, Christian churches, should consider making what he calls biblical restitution to African Americans for the sins of slavery, segregation, and racial injustice. And specifically what he's talking about, as far as being biblical restitution, is setting up financial funds, quote, to make it right. And what he says is that, repentance, it's good to be repentant for past sins, but repentance is not enough. And he, the op-ed quotes a number of statistics. He talks about how slavery, he calls, is one of America's original sins. And it was followed up by things like Jim Crow laws, progressive policies, over-incarceration, other societal factors since then, even since slavery has been abolished, that have compounded the problem and allowed this racism problem to continue to persist. And he says as a result of these policies, the result that we see today is a catastrophic wealth gap. And I'm reading from his op-ed here. He says the median net worth of black families in the United States today is 1/10 the median net worth of white families. 62% of black children born between 1955 and 1970 were raised in poor neighborhoods, compared to 4% of white children. Results for the generation born between 1985 and 2000 were even worse, with 66% of black children raised in poor neighborhoods compared to 6% of white children. He says the only way to explain the story above is the persistence of racial prejudice and its enshrinement into the apparatus of the government. And what he's actually, he quotes from or refers to the story of Zacchaeus. If you remember, Zacchaeus made his wealth through, benefiting from the Roman tax system, right. And he says, and when he repented from it, he didn't just repent, he then went on to say, I give half of my possessions to the poor, and if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will give back 4 times the amount. And so what he's referring to is, he's talking about different programs, like there's one called the Zacchaeus Fund in Atlanta, where Christians who believe that African Americans who agree with his story as far as there being this racially imbalanced system in place, or maybe system's not the right word for it, but I know that's kind of loaded and generates a lot of emotions in people, but these racial injustices that are still permeating through our society. We have this particular example in Atlanta where a committee, a nonprofit charitable committee, assigns funds to support rising black leaders in the church and in the marketplace. So it's not my impression of it anyway, is this Zacchaeus Fund isn't just because you have to have certain racial characteristics, we're going to throw money at you, but it's supporting particular projects, initiative, people that are working towards something. I don't know that for sure. I'm not familiar with it myself. But he is talking about creating things like that, churches basically creating funds like that throughout the country. So that's the long and short, the gist of the op-ed. So now I'm going to throw it to you and tell me what you think about it.
Yeah, it seems like every week we get at least one really controversial.
And we start off with it. Get it out of the way right off the bat.
Just get it out of the way. This is one of those ones that you may agree with me, we may agree to disagree, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. So I'll just weigh in initially with saying that what you said at the end there is that it's not, to your understanding, that the Zacchaeus funds are not designed to just throw money at the problem. And that was actually how I initially took it, was like, we're just raising a generic fund and we're going to throw money at the problem, which I would disagree with that. And I don't doubt that the editor of, he's the CEO of right. Christianity Today, has good intentions with this. I think we all want to know what we can do to do our part. I do not believe that throwing money at any problem ever solves it. And even here, even in this specific case, when we're supporting rising, prominent black leaders
in the church and
in the marketplace too. In the marketplace,
and not just for that you didn't really explain it, but that's what led me to believe it was more than just giving money randomly to people, because it mentioned the marketplace, which tells me well, you must be having some kind of business you're trying to build or something
Sure.
there that they're trying to support.
Okay.
I could be wrong, but that's
Sure.
what my impression was.
Yeah, so if that's the case, I think that's a little bit more credence. I still don't think that that's the answer, or at least the full answer, because we're talking about something that is, if you're talking about systemic injustice, and this can go way off in a different tangent, but if you're talking about systemic injustice, then we have to look at those systems that are unjust. And there are so many different systems. Now, this may be one of them, the marketplace, where there's a inequality there, and that's definitely a place to start. Well, I will say, it's just crazy right now with so many things. You're not sure who to listen to, what, one side saying one thing, the other side saying the other. All that to say, I was listening to this one, well, I've been listening to a lot of different things, but there's one thing that actually Morgan Freeman said that kind of caught my attention. I'd be interested to see your opinion on it. Talking about racial injustice and just racism in general. And Morgan Freeman shared, and he said, how do you stop racism? He says, we stop talking about it. He said, you treat people like people. So in my opinion, like I was saying, I don't think that this is, I think that it has good intentions, but I think a bigger part to the solution is that if we're going to be raising funds, Zacchaeus funds, raise it for a community, raise it for your local community to go out and do good in the community, for the church not to just throw money at the problem, but to actually be out and to be active, engaging with people of all races, engaging in personal evangelism, engaging in personal help and aid in our local communities. I've been kind of stymied sometimes when people come of all different races to our church, and I have to turn them away and say, well, I'm sorry, we don't have the funds right now to help you. And so that's one thing that I think would be really beneficial if we focus on helping our communities wherever we have been placed, our local communities, and that way we can get out there and build those relationships with people of every creed and denomination, because Christianity is, I even said it in my message, Christ chose to unite himself to a particular flesh, of a particular gender, of a particular race, yet still shows no favoritism. And so if we're going to conform to that image, then we should do the same. So we can show no favoritism, because there is no longer any slave nor free, Jew nor Gentile, male nor female. We are all united in the body of Christ. And so that's how we have to start viewing each other. And so having a response that is targeted to a specific subgroup, I worry that it might even just exacerbate the divide or perpetuate the divide, I guess, because you're still seeing it as a us versus them kind of situation, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I guess when it comes down to like Morgan Freeman's quote there, I mean, I guess it means my view, it depends on what he means by we stop talking about it, because in certain contexts, yeah, we don't talk about it, and it shouldn't even enter into the discussion, when you're talking about, whether I want to, hire this employee or that employee, or whether this person should be admitted to the school or that person should be admitted to the school. Everybody should be given an equal opportunity regardless of what their race is and their background. The flip side, though, is there's a quote that I've heard a lot of people say, and they say, I don't see race. I don't even see it when I'm out in the world. It's I'm not racist. I don't see race, or whatever it may be. And even if we assume, for the sake of argument, that was true, that people exist in such a way that they don't see it, I'm not necessarily sure that in all circumstances, again, depending what they mean by it, that's the goal we should be shooting for. And I'll give you this example. We should see race, but we should see it in the right way. If I go out in the community and I say, I don't even see sex, I don't see male versus female, I don't see that. Well, here I am as a male, and if I don't see sex, if I don't see gender, then I will be blinding myself to the experiences, the unique experiences that people from that particular sex are going to have that I'm not going to have. If I say I don't see it, well, then are my ears going to be open when a woman is telling me about how she was discriminated against? You see it in Hollywood. It's really coming out with the whole Me Too movement and everything like that. Am I going to be blind to that because, well, I don't see sex? Well, no, hold on. I need to see it, but I need to see it in the right way. And I kind of feel the same way about race. And we talked about this in one of the, I don't remember if it was the last show or when it was, that I openly admit that there are experiences that I have not had that, African Americans have. And so I don't want to, I can't say, oh, I understand, because I don't, I don't. And so we still want to be fair and we want to promote justice, but at the same time, that's why I'm a little bit wary about his quote about, we don't talk about it, because that sounds to me almost like, well, I don't see race. But we need to, because in order to empathize and to understand what someone's been through, we need to not pretend like we're just completely blind to it, because the fact of the matter is we live in a fallen world where other people do see it and they see it in the wrong way. And if we're not seeing it in the positive way, then we're not listening and empathizing and opening up and listening for potential solutions. Now, as far as the Christianity Today piece, I actually pretty much agree with you, I think, on it. I don't. When I first read the headline and everything, my first reaction was, oh, they just want to throw money at it. Now, to give an example, in today's, a lot of people this year have received, what I don't remember what they call them, but the stimulus funds or whatever from the government. What's that?
Stimulus checks.
Stimulus checks.
The stimulus check, yeah. Where there's like no strings attached or anything. It's just like, here's your money, and go do with it whatever you will.
Which actually, although it seems like there's no strings attached, I think it's an advance on your next tax return.
Yeah, is it so? I mean, it's, yeah. But even if it was just, a here's your money kind of thing, go do with it whatever you want, that's not going to fix this type of problem,
right.
And now if it is something that's more like I was getting the impression of, is we're looking to particular initiatives that people, whether it be businesses, whatever the people are trying to build, and we're trying to provide some kind of support for them, then I think that's more targeted in the right way. But I also agree with you that can't be the only thing, because like it or not, and I do agree with a lot of what this op-ed piece said, in the sense that too often today I think we get focused solely on slavery, and we say, oh, well, slavery was abolished a long time ago. I didn't do it. I didn't own slaves, so I have no role to play in this whole thing. And it's like, I've done nothing wrong, so I can sit back and not do anything about it. But it's not just that. There have been a lot of things since then that have kind of stymied any efforts towards complete and true racial equality. And if you don't believe me, I mean, here's what I keep coming back to. And it's a lot of statistics he was quoting in the op-ed piece. Look at your racial makeup based upon income in this country. What do you see? What do you see? I mean, how long ago was slavery abolished? You want to tell me that we've completely recovered, there's no racism in this country, then why do we have the economic disparity based, I mean, not exclusively upon racial lines. Obviously, it's not saying like all African Americans are poor and all Caucasians are white or rich, but you do see that an economic disparity where African Americans are disproportionately represented in the lower income classes, and Caucasians are disproportionately represented in the higher income classes. Obviously, something's causing that, and so we need to look at why. Is it, and there's a lot of answers. I'm not going to get into all the different proposals that are out there as far as how to go about fixing that, because I am not an expert on that. But I think whatever our focus is, and we should be able to have these conversations about what the best way is to proceed, but we need to, if by reparations you mean actually efforts to repair and get to those underlying causes and address those and figure out some way how we can get to those underlying causes so that we do see true racial equality in our country, I'm all for it. I'm all for it. But throwing money at it is just, blindly, like those stimulus checks, is not going to fix that, because all that's going to happen is the money's going to be spent, and then the underlying causes are still there. Right. So we need to be addressing that.
And that raises other issues of, if it's not targeted at a specific goal, then who decides how the money gets dispersed, and then all of that. Then you've got other inequalities with that if it doesn't get dispersed equitably. And so there's all these potential problems, but I think I would agree with you. That's kind of what I was saying with going back to, if we're looking at something systemic, we have to look at those systems that contribute to it, which are multifaceted. It talks about incarceration, it talks about poverty in neighborhoods, the wealth gap, all of that. Those are all systems. Education, these are all prongs of a system that need to be addressed, and so it's going to be more than just a quick Band-Aid fix.
Yeah, and I don't know if you knew this or not. I was actually a criminal justice major in undergrad, and I actually did some master's work in criminal justice as well. And one of the areas that I studied a bit was corrections, correctional policy. And I was interested that he mentions the incarceration rate. We do incarcerate in this country at a higher rate than other Western civilized nations do. And a part of me thinks that it's not that you don't need to punish. We do. I'm not saying that. And I think people. It's so political in this country nowadays. People will hear, that we want to divide ourselves into us versus them. So somebody says that I think we incarcerate too much. They think, oh, you just want to let them out on the street. No. Okay, there's other options and solutions out there. I remember one of my master's projects, I can't even remember what it was. This was a long time ago now. But I had to come up with an alternative corrections type program to address a certain category of offenders. It was a very eye-opening experience. But I think lots of times in our country we have a kind of a lazy-brained attitude, and I'm wondering if that contributes to this racism as well, in the sense that with the incarceration, for example, well, somebody's done something illegal that we don't like. Well, let's just lock them up so we don't have to see them anymore. Put them behind bars. They're out of sight, out of mind, and there we go. Problem is solved. Whereas but then you look at recidivism rates, which is what's a fancy term for meaning they're going to reoffend when they get out, and they're not pleasant to look at, and which means that this over incarceration is not that you don't use incarceration. You do. There's a role for that as well, but it does tend to indicate that maybe some of the people we're incarcerating, if we could start trying to think outside the box, which is going to be harder work, that maybe there's other ways we can address that to actually help again get to the underlying problem and address the underlying problem. But it's going to be harder work. It's much easier to say just lock somebody up and throw away the key, Right. And that same thing when we're dealing with the systems and the racial inequality we see in the country. It's not going to be a quick Band-Aid fix. There's hard work involved. Sure. And the first step, as much as this particular op-ed says, repentance is not enough, and I agree, repentance is not enough, but that doesn't mean we should be diminishing the importance of repentance. Yeah. And that gets to Pastor Jay's message from 2 weeks ago now, 3 weeks ago now, where he was talking about understanding our role as Christians, in that if you really believe the gospel is transforming and you believe that people's lives can be changed as a result of the gospel, then why aren't you out sharing the gospel more? Because if you were out sharing the gospel more and you really believe it could change people's lives, then look around the world and you're getting all mad at all these things that people are doing. Wouldn't you like to see their lives changed? Well, if you know a way their lives could be changed and you're not sharing it, then that's on you. That's on you. Not to say that you're to blame for them rioting or looting or anything like that. I mean, they still have individual responsibility. But that doesn't mean that we as Christians don't have some kind of responsibility, because we believe on a societal level that lives can be changed and hearts can be changed for the gospel of Jesus Christ. If we really believe that, then we should be out sharing it, because the result would then be people's hearts would be changed and lives would be changed, and we wouldn't be seeing the amount of violence and injustice we see in the world today. There. Soapbox down. All right. I'm off. All right. Yeah. Anything else on this one?
No, I would agree with that.
Agree with my soapbox. So, all right. Let's move on to the next story, and I'll lead off on this one. Matter of fact, because this has some legal issues, and I'm the lawyer in the panel here, sure. I'm going to go ahead and talk first on it too. But this is comes out of the state of Colorado. In November, Colorado voters are going to be considering a law, or potentially a referendum to have a law passed, that would prohibit abortion after 22 weeks of gestation. There was basically, the way these referendums work is you have to get a certain number of signatures on a petition in order to get the measure on the ballot, and they did. They were successful in getting more than enough signatures to put the initiative on the ballot. And it says it would make it unlawful for any person to intentionally or recklessly perform or attempt to perform an abortion on any other person if the probable gestational age of the fetus is at least 22 weeks. And it does have an exception here for the life of the mother. If the life of the mother is at risk, then that changes things, and you can still do it. Now, the reason I wanted to lead off on this is I am a lawyer, and pretty about everybody here has heard of the case of Roe V Wade, but I'm shocked and amazed at how few people actually understand what Roe V Wade actually held. And so there's a reason why you're looking at this 22 weeks as being the line drawing here, and why they think they can get this passed and this can be held constitutional even under Roe v. Wade. What Roe v. Wade held, as people say it was a trimester system, that's kind of playing a little fast and loose. What Roe versus Wade held was that during the first trimester, that the states are not allowed to basically step into the abortion discussion at all. That's got to be left completely between the doctor and the woman. In the second trimester, they said that states can pass regulations on abortion, but only those that concern the health of the mother, the health or the life or health of the mother, basically. And actually, even calling it the second trimester is a little bit misleading, because it was really, the time period was after the first trimester and prior to what's called viability. Viability is essentially when the baby is able to survive outside the womb. I'm shortening it a little bit, but that's basically the concept.
36 weeks.
Yeah, roughly. So anywhere from the point when it's allowed, when the baby is, from after the first trimester is over until the point where it's viable, then the only restrictions that the state is allowed to pass at that point in time, according to Roe v. Wade, is those that concern to protect the life or the health of the mother. So still no focus whatsoever on the baby at this point in time. Then after viability, what Roe held was that the state could, not must, could put restrictions on abortion after the baby is viable. And then there have been other restrictions based upon that, as far as defining, well, what does the health of the mother mean, for example, and Planned Parenthood versus Casey says you can't have any restrictions that put undue burdens on a woman's ability to get an abortion. In that case, it was the spousal consent provision they tried to get passed. They said, no, you can't do that. So there's an undue burden test. But basically, what Roe, if you look at Roe from the start, while the Justice Blackmun, who wrote the opinion, claimed that he was just trying to take no position whatsoever on the abortion debate, as far as we don't know whether it's a person or it's not a person, and so we're not going to make a decision one way or another on that. But we're going to try to kind of walk this middle ground. He didn't end up walking a middle ground. It's not remotely a middle ground. There's no protection whatsoever in there for the unborn legally. If a state wants to allow abortion all the way up through birth, under Roe, they can. Now, they're permitted to do stuff after viability and put restrictions, but they don't have to, so there's no particular provision. My wife's leaning into the mic. Is there something you wanted to say? Or no? Okay. I didn't know if there was a comment or something like that. So now you can find, certain things like right around the earliest viability stage. And keep in mind, viability, meaning ability to survive outside the womb, can include using medical equipment, the best medical equipment available. And there have been babies I know as young as like 24 weeks that have been able to survive with medical assistance outside of the womb. But that's basically what they're trying to play around with. And this article doesn't say if they're trying to use the fetal pain argument or where they're getting the 22 weeks from, so I'm not sure. But under the current legal framework, if they could argue that basically with the advances, see, at the time of Roe, viability was right around the start of the third trimester, because this is a long time ago. But medical science has improved, so now it keeps getting pushed back earlier and earlier and earlier. So they might be trying to argue that, at that point, it's 22 weeks, if we can keep the baby alive outside the womb, then it's viable, so we can do whatever we want at this point in time. It's legal. So anyway, that's just a legal framework I was going to lay down there. I'll get into my philosophical apologist framework in a little bit, but now I'll throw it to you. What do you think about this referendum?
Well, any referendum that makes progress toward the abolition of abortion, if we are for the sanctity of life, then I applaud. I'm happy for. There is a long way to go. I think it says in here twice they've defeated proposals on the personhood approach. So there's still, are they a person or not? And that's a whole ongoing debate that we can get into philosophically. Yeah. Although I think we would be on the same page there. I thank you for all of the background with the Roe v. Wade, because I think that's very helpful. Actually, it helps me because I had heard at some point it's the after first trimester, but up until viability. But like you said, the 3 trimester rule is kind of hard and fast. So then that raises the philosophical question. If they can, at some point in the future, we can keep a fetus viable up from, even if we push it all the way back up from conception to birth, what then?
Right.
Can we push it all the way back? But anyway, as far as the article is concerned, I think I would applaud, what's the name of the group here? They had like a catchy name in here. It was Due Date Too Late. And so I would applaud their efforts in at least getting that on the ballot. Hopefully it passes. That's my hope as well. Of course, and knowing where we stand on. And
then it's got to withstand legal challenge, because there's going to be legal challenges to it. But
right.
But I think under the framework, the Roe framework, there's a good argument that this could. Now, one thing that I was curious about, because you might have heard me say in Roe and in its progeny, they call it the subsequent cases on it, they did talk about you have to allow exceptions for the life or health of the mother. Right. And one argument a lot of people are trying, and the court's given some reassurance, some validation of this argument in cases, is that health isn't just physical health, it can include emotional health and everything like that. Well, if we say that, does that basically make Roe even completely meaningless? I mean, because if you want to say anybody could come up in the third let's say you're in a state that doesn't allow abortion during the third trimester or after viability, and the mother says, well, but I'm going to have emotional trauma if I have to go through this, is that enough to say, okay, well then it doesn't matter what the state says, right. You get a doctor to sign off on that and you could have an abortion because it's for the emotional health of the mother. So that term, health of the mother, is a bit wishy-washy as far as what exactly that entails.
There's a lot of slack to tie loopholes.
Right, but you'll notice in this article it didn't say anything about that. It said it makes an exception for the life of the mother. So that, I'm wondering if they're opening themselves up to a constitutional challenge there, because if it's only the life and not the health, I think they would have been better off saying it's life and health, but defining health in some specific way, so they can say we're doing this, but here's what health means. So, because I don't think anybody thinks, none of us, it's certainly a very different situation, even in the third trimester, if for one reason or another the mother's life is in danger as a result of this pregnancy. That being said, it's also largely a red herring, especially the advances in medical science today. That's like not entirely, don't misunderstand me, virtually a non-existent scenario today. But people will play that up and to try to justify abortion on demand, and that's where you get to, well, hold on, you're not just asking for abortion to be legal in situations where the life of the mother is threatened. You want it to be legal in all circumstances, even when it's not being threatened. So what does the life of the mother have to do with anything? I'll agree with you on that. Fine. If I agree with you that we should allow abortion in situations where the life of the mother is threatened, will you agree with me that we shouldn't allow it in any other circumstance? And we know the answer is going to be there.
Right.
So anyway, but that's one thing I found interesting. I'm wondering if they're going to open themselves up to constitutional challenge on that. I hope they have something more in there than just the life, so that they don't get we don't get bogged down in these other loopholes, we want to call it, easy ways. Don't give courts an easy way to say your law is unconstitutional. Make them face the decision squarely. Now, I do want to say, and get into the philosophical side of things a little bit, the Roe standard, I would say, hinges on viability. It says that states are not allowed to restrict abortion until that baby is viable, able to survive outside the womb. And here's the problem I've always had with that, and this deals with the personhood argument you were talking about. A lot of people will try to say, well, even though we know it's a human life, or it's a human being that's in there, it's a developing human being, but it's not a person. There's something different between being a human being and being a person. Only people have rights. You don't necessarily have a right to life just because you're a human being. You have to be a person, and you're not a person unless you have X, and they insert whatever quality for X they want to use. Viability is a very common one. They'll say, you're not a person until you're viable, you're able to survive outside the womb. Well, here's the problem with that. Viability is largely determined by medical science. So here we are, we're just outside of Baltimore. We got one of the best hospitals in the world just down the road here in Johns Hopkins Hospital. Let's say that you have a pregnant lady here who's in Baltimore, and then when she's here in Baltimore, her baby would be considered viable because Johns Hopkins could keep that baby alive even outside the womb. But then she decides to go on a mission trip to Africa, to Central Africa. And while she's in Central Africa, there are no modern hospitals in the area where she is. At that point in time, in that location, the exact same baby at the exact same stage of development now would not be considered viable because they don't have the medical resources there to keep it alive. Does that make sense? It's a very simple question. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, I think of, and going into the whole philosophical debate about personhood, there's this really short but really interesting book. It's Can Animals and Machines Be Persons? Right. Right. If you've got, what are the qualifications for personhood? Is it self-awareness? Is it language? Is it, what are those things? So I think of I forget its name, but there's a AI that was granted effectively personhood because it was granted citizenship in Saudi Arabia, because it can do all these processes and mine Bitcoin, and so it can generate income, which then can be taxed for Saudi Arabia. And so this machine effectively, even though they aren't, I don't think, outright saying it's a person, have effectively granted it personhood with granting it citizenship. So and the only reason that machine is viable is due to technology. It is a piece of technology, and so the only reason it can continue its processes that make it a person, make it a citizen, is due to technology.
So if I punch that machine, have I committed assault? If you terminate that machine, have you done a property crime, or have you committed murder?
Right.
And the situation I was giving, speaking of personhood, you got the baby being viable in Baltimore, but not in Africa, and then come back and Baltimore's viable again. Are you going to tell me that baby is a person here in Baltimore, but then loses their personhood when they travel to Africa, then regains their personhood when they come back to Baltimore? It's an irrelevant distinction. It makes no sense whatsoever. Another interesting thing, I was actually having a conversation this past week online with a gentleman who's actually in a seminary class I'm taking right now, and we were talking about abortion in the class, and this is a Christian gentleman who was trying to defend the proposition that he says that he's pro-life, but he does think abortion should be allowed during the first trimester. And the reason he thinks it should be allowed during the first trimester, he says, because I don't think God imparts a soul until, and then he gives certain biological factors, like until the baby has a heartbeat, until the baby has brain waves, then that God has not imparted a soul into that child, and therefore it's not abortion if there's no soul present. And I asked him several times, and I have yet to get an answer, because he's really kind of, to me, and I'd be curious because you're more the theologian here at the panel, I'm curious what your thoughts are. To me, it seems like he's very much equating the physical with the spiritual. And I mean, we don't need to get into like substance dualism and all that if you don't want to here, but that's, but it seems like, well, wait a minute. What is it? I kept asking, what is it about the presence of a heartbeat? What is it about the presence of brain waves that you're equating to now God can give it a soul? It doesn't make sense, because it would seem to me that while Scripture doesn't, correct me if I'm wrong, does not specifically state it's at this exact moment that God gives us a soul, it does seem to indicate to me, especially if we look at the end of life, that the survival of the soul is not contingent upon the survival of the physical body.
Right.
So if it's not contingent upon the fully functioning physical body at the end of the life, why would it be contingent upon a fully functioning with brain waves and the heartbeat at the beginning of life? It doesn't make sense to me. Anyway, so that was my...
Yeah, well, that brings two things to mind for me. So one is, at the end of life, our soul is not contingent upon having a physical body, although that is not to say that the physical body is not important.
Right.
Clearly, we can get into the whole, bodily resurrection of Christ and why that is important. And so what we believe in is not some ethereal heaven, but a physical place. And so there is importance. The physical is important. We believe in a bodily resurrection, because if we are united with Christ in a death like his, we'll be united in a resurrection like his, which has a physical body with different properties. It's a glorified body, but it's a physical body. That aside, I'd be interested to see how he makes that distinction of where God imparts a soul and what he uses. I guess, brainwaves and heartbeat. But clearly, at least for God to impart a soul, okay, so soul, Pastor Jay even brought this up in his message at Pentecost. Yeah, soul in the Hebrew, it's nephesh, or it's ruach, and then, it's nephesh and ruach, and there's little distinctions here, but it can be breath or wind. So for Adam, for example, well, he never gestated, he was just created by God, but so then God had to breathe the breath of life into him. Now, clearly, personhood in the biblical sense for people other than Adam who have gestated occurs before birth, because David in the Psalms talks about you taught me wisdom in that secret place, talking about his mother's womb. He says, surely I was sinful from birth. So he says, but you taught me wisdom in that secret place. So there is a interaction between God and infant occurring in that secret place that David refers to in the womb. So if there can be interaction, then I would assert that clearly signifies a soul, that thing that separates us from the rest of creation, that allows us to interact with the divine, to interact with God. So I would assert then that he imparts a soul certainly before birth. And so I think it's, again, kind of like what you're saying, it's a red herring to kind of split hairs as to when exactly that is.
Right. Well, and that gets to the other point I made to this gentleman that, again, still don't really, and I had other work I had to do. I had to sign off. He may have commented afterwards, and I sincerely doubt he's watching this, but if he is, I'm not, I apologize if he said something else and I missed it. But the other point I made to him is I use this example. So wait a minute. So even let's assume, for the sake of argument, that I think we'd agree that Scripture doesn't specifically say it's at this particular point that the child gets a soul. Now you're trying to make an argument that you think it makes sense that the soul would be imparted at this particular point, but you don't know. It's just you're kind of your best guess. Well, let me give you, doesn't that all the more reason show why we shouldn't allow abortion? And I gave this example. Let's imagine you've got a hunter in the woods, all right, and he's sitting there perched waiting for a deer to come by, and he sees a rustling in the bushes. Now the bushes are just moving. He can't tell yet what's moving them. It might be a deer, in which case it's fine. Then again, it might be his fellow hunter. Should he shoot?
No.
No. Okay,
Right,
I think we can all
clearly.
agree. Because of that. Now, let's say that he does shoot, and it happens to be a deer. Are we going to look at him and say, oh, okay, well, it's all good? No, we're still pretty appalled that he shot under those circumstances without knowing whether it was a deer or whether it was a hunter. The same thing here. If you don't know, using personhood, if you don't know whether it's a person, if you don't know whether there's a soul imparted, even if we assume that the existence of a soul is the defining factor, if you don't know for sure whether that child has a soul or not, then you should err on the side of not killing it.
Yeah.
You know, it's
Right.
so. I mean, even under his philosophy and what he was saying, I was like, you still should not be supporting abortion in the first trimester, because that's like the hunter shooting in the bushes without knowing what's there.
Yeah, that's a good argument.
So, anyway, all right. We've gotten through the first two controversial subjects of the day, and we're running really late already, but we got two more to go through. Why don't you take us on the next one?
All right. Well, let's get into a little bit more uplifting. We always try to add more uplifting.
And
ones.
there's no rocket ships this time, Mary Kay. It's not the literally uplifting one. This is feel-good stories.
Yes. So this is also actually from Christianity Today, but it's a study saying Christian giving rebounds to pre-pandemic levels. So this article, and there's a lot of statistics that they quote in here, according to different stats. But essentially what it's done is, and they're going to continue to evaluate quarterly, I believe is what the end of the article said, is they've evaluated giving for both churches, specifically they split it up into churches and other Christian nonprofits. But across the board, Christian organizations have not experienced the level of decrease in giving that was projected for the whole pandemic, and in fact, it's begun to increase to the point where, in some cases, it's even back to pre-pandemic levels. And so that's certainly encouraging news for anybody who works in the church or who works in Christian organizations, and it should be encouraging news for all of us because then, as it says, we can take that money and allocate it toward doing ministry, right, and not live in a state of fear or hoarding of this fear of scarcity that people are going to stop giving. So now we can resume. We should have always been using that for ministry, but now this is encouraging news that all the more.
Well, yeah, and it's very. I mean, if you think about it, especially if you're facing a pandemic. And people, we talked about this before, people were looking for hope and we had hope to give. I mean, if there's ever a time when we really should be focusing on ministry and doing more, not less, it was during a time of pandemic. But, you need resources for that. And so obviously giving, it's hard, but it's very important. If we're going to up our ministry resources, then we need to up the giving in order to make sure the church can do what it should be doing. But I did like the fact this article did make the point of saying, it's like, okay, now don't live in the spirit of scarcity and be the person hoarding everything, the guy hoarding everything in his barns. Go out and do ministry with it and do something with it. Now, and it did say that initially there was a falling out. It looks like when the pandemic first hit, churches, nonprofit Christian ministries, all of that, their giving was down initially, but it's gotten back to the point now where it's gone back up again. Some, I think, even said are getting more now than what they were even in January. Well, I guess that's not that surprising now that I think about it, because January is the first month of the year. Everybody's giving their money in December, typically speaking, to get that tax break. So you do usually see a decrease in January, but still, I mean, a lot of them were saying they were seeing higher levels of giving now than they even did in January of this year, and higher levels of giving year to year. So if you look at the month of May, for example, of 2020, some of these ministries were seeing higher levels of giving in May 2020 than they saw in May 2019. Now, I worried, my one worry when I read this article, though, is that people are going to read it and say, oh, okay, well, then they don't need my money anymore.
Right, yeah.
Not true, for a variety of reasons. Number one, there's still, the giving was down for a while, and so we do still need to, we don't want to get back to that point. But also, like I said before, there's like extra ministry, I guess you could say, to be done in this time. I know we've got a lot of things we're going on with, like here at Trinity. I mean, I'll give a case in point. It's just, my personal experience. You're watching us right now live on Trinity Talk Live. Well, maybe somebody's watching, I don't know, but whoever's watching, okay, you're watching us live. You know what, before this pandemic we weren't doing? Broadcasting Trinity Talk live, okay? Right. It was pre-recorded. We weren't doing any of this. We didn't have the, if you look at our live streams of our worship services now compared to what we were able to do before the pandemic, the quality of it, the ability to actually see the lyrics right next to the image and sing along with the hymns and all that, and basically have your whole order of worship on the screen for you. We didn't have any of that before, These are all things that we've come up with since then. They do cost money. They have cost money. You know what else? A lot of the equipment we're using right now is not Trinity's. It's not. I mean, it's Mary Kay's and my stuff that we've donated the use for. But eventually we're going to want it back. But this is an example of what I mean. Now the question becomes, okay, well, we're going to be moving back into the church here in July. I know there's going to be some people out there that aren't going to be comfortable with that, where, there's some people who want to come back. Some people still, for right now, might want to stay at home. And so we do still want to continue to bring the same level of ministry to you in your home that we've been bringing. Well, if the giving all of a sudden plummets because people hear stories like this and think, oh, you don't need my money anymore, we're not going to be able to do that.
Right. And
that's just one example, obviously, but there's other ministries too.
And again, how that's played out in Trinity, I will say, we've been incredibly blessed here at Trinity, not only in the fact that we kind of had a footing, a digital footprint, so to speak.
To begin with, right.
To begin with, so that kind of made the transition a lot easier into a predominantly online ministry. And we still want to keep that up. So like you said, as we re-enter back into our sanctuaries, we still want to maintain the online presence. And like you're saying, there's more ministry to be done there, and that can kind of lead into our next story. But the folks at Trinity, and if you're watching this and you're a member of Trinity or have been giving to our ministry, we just want to thank you from the bottom of our heart, because of your generosity and your contribution to this ministry, that's made this possible. And so it is really encouraging, and we have been really blessed. Trinity has responded. And I think it is a call to all the more continue continue your commitment to give and to support the ministry.
Yeah, and the flip side is also true. Because we are still committed to ministry here, understand that means we are also committed to ministry to you. So if you are, for example, someone who's not, you're still out of work, you're not in a position to give, then we still, if you need help, we are here. And we're a community of believers. And so it's because of those of us who are able to continue giving that we are able to continue to helping those who maybe cannot. I mean, we still have our food closet ministry that's still open here 3 days a week. And so if you are in need for something, we're still here for that as well. So I don't want to make it sound like we're making too much of a sales pitch. That's not the point. But, good stewardship is one of a good Christian principle that we all need to follow. So anyway, so that's a feel-good, uplifting story. Yeah. You got another feel-good, uplifting story?
Wait, I got some.
Oh, wait.
Yeah. We got a couple people watching us on Facebook talking about something new we were able to do.
Woohoo!
This is our first time bringing.
It's the first time this show's been on Facebook.
Yeah. So say hi to Jeanette Harrington.
Hi, Jeanette.
Hi, Jeanette.
And Mandy Schaefer.
Hi, Mandy.
Hi, Mandy.
Very cool.
Thank you for joining us.
They both said they were watching.
No, and that's a good thing that they're watching, and that it shows something else. That's this past Sunday was the first Sunday we were able to get the worship service on Facebook and YouTube. For those of you that are watching, we are aware, but on Sunday, hopefully everything's been looking good today because we're inside, but we did have some slight and at one point more major issues with the video synchronizing with the audio, and we think that was because, well, computers and stuff like that aren't really designed to be out in the sunlight, and as the service went on, they were overheating some more, and so we've got some fans we're bringing in for this weekend that hopefully will help fix that. But just Mary Kay's point is well taken. This was, we were something we wanted to do for a long time, is to get our worship services both on YouTube and on Facebook, to give multiple people options to do that. And something else we were able to do this weekend was we utilized Zoom. For the people that were here in their cars, sometimes you get these cars all backed up and somebody's all the way in the back, can't necessarily see whoever's speaking all the way at the front very well. And we had recognition of our senior graduates, and we had recognition of our children's choir. And a lot of people in the back wanted to be able to see that. Well, we were able to offer a Zoom meeting just for the people who were physically here. You have to be here in order to get the login information and everything. So that, because YouTube and Facebook have a buffer delay, like 20 to 30 seconds. So they could actually pull up the Zoom meeting on their device in their car, even if they're really far back, and they'd be able to see the video feed in essentially real time and get a closer up look to it. That's something else we were able to do this weekend to help enhance the worship experience of the people that were here. So. You look like you're not leaning in? Okay. All right. So speaking of our last feel-good story.
Yeah. So speaking of that, and speaking of just more opportunities that this presents.
I just realized this isn't going to help my case at all, because my wife's always telling me that I need to include feel-good stories, and the two that I brought up are not, and the two that you brought up are. I'm still going to hear about it afterwards. But anyway, go ahead.
We're not keeping track. We're a team. I got your back.
I send you some of those stories.
I know.
So the headline for this last story reads, 2 billion gospel presentations. Online evangelism ministry passes milestone. So this is referring to the online ministry of Global Ministry Outreach, who just celebrated their 2 billionth online gospel presentation on May 19th. So during this pandemic, this is a ministry that specifically targets online presentations of the gospel. And what they do is they have more than 100 websites in 13 different languages, and they have 3,500 volunteer missionaries in 110 countries who contact individuals who make a decision for Christ. And primarily, it's driven through search engines. So if people search, they have certain keywords or phrases that if you search, how do I find peace? Or how do I learn about God? Or how do I know God? How do I get saved? All of these. It populates search results in the search engine, and what you can do, what this ministry has done is they pay to have their websites advertised on different search platforms, and then it directs them to their website where it gives them their answer to the question that they were searching, but also leads into what they call a gospel presentation. Pretty much, it's evangelism. It's digital evangelism, and the way they count that a gospel presentation is if somebody has scrolled all the way to the bottom and read everything. So if they just clicked on the link and then exited, that doesn't really count. So at least 2 billion people have clicked on these links, scrolled to the bottom, at least been presented with the gospel and read that. And if they click for further action, then one of these 3,500 volunteers in 110 countries will contact that person, depending on the language they speak, and will begin a relationship of discipling them into a relationship with Jesus Christ. And I just found all of that to be a really neat model, I think, of just online evangelism, using the tools that are available to reach people across language barriers, across country borders. Just so much potential there. And we were just talking about different ministry opportunities, and if the local church can kind of grab onto things like this, I think just the impact that it would have for the gospel would be tremendous.
Yeah, I was really fascinated by their
Can I
methodology,
interrupt?
what they worked up, and that we.
Can I interrupt real quick?
Sure.
Can you guys say hello to Joseph Ken?
Hey,
Joseph,
Joe
how you
King,
doing?
He's also watching on Facebook.
How's it going?
Everybody's
Jeff?
watching us on Facebook today. Welcome to
No,
Facebook.
you have a couple viewers right now on YouTube. I just don't know who they are.
Well,
They're
hi
not-
to YouTube viewers.
They're not saying hello.
We don't know who you are. So if you want us to know, if we will happily greet you by name if you say your name in the live chat and just say, here I am. My wife will interrupt us and we will say hi to you too as well. By the way, did I mention it's my daughter's birthday? Hey, say happy birthday to Sarah, everybody. Anyway, what I found interesting, I really was intrigued by their methodology and how they went about doing this, and that they found a way. So many times when we do things online, it's almost like a shotgun approach. It's like you got to get pure numbers, just wide, shoot out to everybody, and hope that you get a few Christians or a few fewer just people in there. But because their ads were targeting people who are putting in certain search terms, like how do I know God, things like that, you've got an audience, so to speak, that is already interested in what you have to provide. And that probably helps increase their, the response rate and everything. But even then, it doesn't sound like the way it's been described that it's overly aggressive either. It's, they reach out, they'll get an ad, it'll pop up to their website, and they go to their website and they can investigate. And if that individual says they want to make a decision for Christ, then they can fill out a form basically inviting a volunteer missionary to contact them for more information to follow up. So it's not overly aggressive. It doesn't come across like a sales pitch. It's well targeted. And the most important thing, you mentioned discipleship and making disciples. I'm a big proponent of this, which is why I love the NALC in this regard. In a lot of regards, that sounded bad. But well, the NALC is a denomination. That's for those that aren't with us here at Trinity. The North American Lutheran Church is the denomination to which we belong. I remember one person watching one of these shows, I think at one point assumed we were ELCA, which is the largest Lutheran denomination in America. We are not ELCA, we are NALC. And one huge priority of the NALC is discipleship, because the Great Commission didn't just say, go out and make believers. It said, go out and make disciples. And too many ministries, I think, over time have focused so much on the decision aspect. Sorry, my passive-aggressive watch, it was 2 minutes ago, was telling me, is it time to get up? But now that I've been gesturing with my left hand, it thinks I'm up and exercising now. So if I do this more often, it's just to get my step count up. Anyway, but the fact that too many ministries, I think, today, focus so much on the decision, and not necessarily today, but even over the past 20 years or so, and I'm not going to call them out by name, but they focus so much on the decision. It's like, let's get you to make, even then we're getting into decision theology, which I'm not going to get into that whole discussion. I'm just going to leave it at this. We're Lutheran. But if you don't know what I mean by that, we'll have a conversation later today about denominational differences. But a lot of them that are not necessarily the same theological bent, focus very much on decision theology and getting someone to make a decision for Christ, and then that's it. Right. And then there's nothing after that.
Good luck. Send you on your way.
You're on your way. Congratulations. Oh, look, we can notch a little number that we got another decision for Christ. Yay, us. Right. Whereas this, it's like, okay, it says, since its founding, more than 230 million people have indicated they became a Christian through the ministry. But then it goes on to say, if that individual says they made a decision, they fill out a form, a volunteer missionary will contact them, and they will begin a process of discipling that individual and ultimately connecting them into a local church or a community of believers. Yeah. That's essential. Yeah. So we can get them. So it's not becoming a Christian is not the end of the journey; it's the beginning. Yeah. And we need to keep that in mind. Yeah, now you're leaning into the mic.
Yes, I told you the signal is when I take off my headphones because I don't want to hear my own voice. Your daughter is watching on YouTube.
Hi, daughter. Did she say happy birthday to herself?
No, she said hi to you and said also, please stop, Dad.
Love you, honey.
But Jeanette has chimed in with a happy birthday to her on Facebook. Cool. So
we won't sing. I'm not going to sing, okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
She got all the right letters. They're just in the wrong way. Oh, Mickey is also watching. Mickey Barkaloo. So say hi to her.
Hey, Mickey, how you doing?
She's on Facebook. And just to add in, could you just really quickly touch on what the terminology of making a decision for Christ means for anybody?
Oh, you want me to get into that? Okay.
I mean, just can we be basic about it? Just because it's something that not everybody always understands what that means.
I'm not going to get too theological, and Ben will correct me if I'm wrong because he's the theologian on the panel. But and I'm not going to call out denominations by name. Let's just say.
Then let him answer it.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, well, typically what we mean when we say making a decision for Christ, there are certain denominations that push that more heavy-handed. Have you found Christ yet? And so it's this understanding that you can make a decision, that the decision rests on the individual to make the first step to salvation. Whereas Lutherans, we believe that really God is the initiator of our salvation through the Holy Spirit. So even faith itself is an act of the Holy Spirit. So that's kind of the theological side, and we'll leave that aside for now before getting into too much of the semantics of it. But making a decision for Christ, basically accepting, when we say, accepted Christ into your heart, you hear that phrase thrown around a lot. A lot of evangelists, even, Billy Graham, however, they throw that around, have you accept Christ into your heart? And so it's however you define it, it's that commitment to become a follower of Christ.
Right. So the decision theology distinction really boils on. I used when I was teaching the Mere Christianity class. I talked about who has the initiative, who takes the initiative. Is it God or is it us?
Yeah.
In that process, or in the act of becoming a Christian, accepting Jesus Christ. Is that because we've accepted, or is it because God's given us the faith? So that's a denominational difference in there. And the only reason it was kind of I don't know, sore spot's not the right word for me, but, I just taught the class on Mere Christianity, and C.S. Lewis is kind of sloppy sometimes, I think, with his wording about some of this stuff. Some things he says make it sound like it's all on God. Other things he says make it sound like it's all on us. But I kind of hit that home an awful lot because I felt it's like, your book's called Mere Christianity, but Mr. Lewis, here, you might be stepping a little bit outside the bounds of mere Christianity when you start talking about these initiative things. But
Sure.
Sandy Mahon is also watching us.
Sandy's
Sandy.
watching? Hey, Sandy, how you doing? Hey, Sandy, we got to talk. I'm going to post something in our Facebook group. We got to do a Zoom meeting. But you know what I'm talking about, Sandy. I'm not going to say it here broadcasting for everybody. Then my wife knows what I'm talking about. So she's in our small group. Now I just said it over YouTube.
Okay. But you know.
So now everybody does. So anyway, but when getting back to this last story really quickly, and then we got to wrap things up, is my biggest takeaway from this, well, two big takeaways. Number one, the commitment to discipleship afterwards, and number two, the creative thinking, as far as, finding a way to reach people who, not just by the shotgun approach, and thinking, okay, here's a way of reaching people who are actually, we know are asking these questions. They're typing them into their search engine, and so a way of reaching them. And I think that's something, not necessarily saying we all have to do this exact same thing, but that's the kind of thing that makes me think at this time of the pandemic, when, like it or not, the church is not and should not look exactly the same coming out of this pandemic as it did going in.
Correct.
We need to be thinking outside the box about thinking about ways like this to reach people who have a need, who want to hear the gospel, everybody needs to hear the gospel. A new way, just if you're at a church that's stuck in this is the way we've always done it, this is the way we should do it, then the thinking of that church, in my opinion, needs to change. Because we need something. We need to look at the things we've always done and ask, well, is the way we've always done it still viable in this environment that we're in today? And if it is, great. If it's not, we need to be willing to. There's an expression. It's a morbid expression in screenwriting. When if you've written a script for a movie and you might have this one scene that you absolutely love, it's a work of art, the dialogue is fantastic, this is the best thing I've ever written, but then you go through the editing process and you realize it doesn't really advance the story very much. They call it killing your babies. Sometimes as a screenwriter, you can't be, going back to that abortion story. But but in screenwriting, the phrase is you can't be afraid to kill your babies.
And now we came full circle.
You can't be afraid to kill your babies no matter how much you love them. If they don't fit, if they don't advance the story, then you got to get rid of them. Well, you could say the same thing about ministry. If it's not advancing the gospel in our current setting, then we got to get rid of it and replace it and find something that is advancing the gospel.
Reminds me of a quote I'm pretty sure I've said on this show before, but Duffy Robbins, one of my mentors, but he has this quote. He says, "Sacred cows make good hamburgers." So if we got a sacred cow that you're afraid to get rid of, maybe time to reevaluate that. But no, something, and there's even a natural progression there in terms of thinking about. And we've said it on this show before that this pandemic has forced us to think outside of the box and forced us to rethink how we do ministry. And there's been a natural, like even at Trinity here, we've noticed just during the time of the pandemic, we've seen viewership and even contribution of people outside of the state of Maryland who have been watching us and interacting with our ministry and been blessed by our ministry. So I think that's really important for us to pick up on and to continue that because, like you said, the makeup should not look the same as it did pre-pandemic. And I think by and large, a lot of churches in America, even if they weren't pre-equipped before COVID hit, now have transitioned into more of an online ministry approach. I think a lot of churches, at least ones that are continuing to thrive and grow, have adopted the online ministry strategy. And so now it's a matter of, okay, well, how do we advance that? Where is God leading us to?
Well, the Great Commission was to take the gospel to the ends of the earth. Through
Yeah.
online ministry, we have a very unique opportunity to do that. Like you're saying, even here at Trinity, we've seen an increase in viewers and people interacting with us that aren't local to our community, just as long as we don't lose sight of local mission as well. Obviously, a lot of you want to make an impact in people's personal life, especially people like we mentioned before who are jobless right now, out of work, and are really struggling or emotionally struggling. The best way to do that is with a personal relationship with them, and so just don't lose track on the local needs and serving your local community. But at the same time, we have a very unique opportunity for a global outreach that people are all of a sudden more open to and susceptible to.
Yeah, it starts in your Jerusalem, then Judea, then Samaria, then the ends of the earth.
There you go. So, all right?
All right.
We good?
Yeah.
We're good. All right. Hey, everybody, thank you very much for watching us here today. We are, theoretically, every Monday at 12 noon, we're going to be live, and hopefully, as long as everything went according to plan today, and it sounds like we got some people out there watching on Facebook, that we're going to try to keep streaming this thing live, both on YouTube and on Facebook. If you are, no matter where you're watching, if you could go over to our YouTube page and subscribe to us on YouTube, we'd really appreciate that. Last I checked, we were at like 783 or something like that. We are still trying to get that YouTube channel up to 1,000 subscribers. It's going to allow us a little more versatility in what we can do on that channel once we reach to that point. But also, if you haven't liked our Facebook page here, the Trinity Joppa Facebook page, give us a like on that. And now that we are on Facebook, I do want to kind of educate people on something so you can see all that we are doing here at Trinity. If you're on our home page, our home Facebook page, on the left side, you'll see a whole bunch of little things you can click on, one of which is groups. If you don't click on it right now, you're going to go away from our video. Wait till the video's over. But if you click on groups, you'll be able to see all of our Facebook groups that we have here, various different ministries. I think men's ministry has one, women's may have one, different youth, things like that. And then on the right side of the page, if you scroll down a little bit, you'll see pages liked by this page, all right? And listed there, we have some other ministries as well, but we also have, some of our ministries here actually have their own Facebook pages, not just a group. Like Trinity Joppa channel or YouTube channel has its own Facebook page. The Passion Play has its own Facebook page. And so between those two places, both the group section on the left side of the screen and the pages liked section on the right side of the screen, you should be able to kind of walk your way through and navigate through our entire Facebook presence and everything that we've got going on here at Trinity. It's really, really cool to see a lot of what's going on. So, all right, that it?
Sounds good.
Well, I don't know if your wife hasn't commented, so I don't know if she's watching today. So,
well, Levi had a doctor's appointment, so she may not.
She might not be watching. Yeah. Well, tell her that I said we're going to miss you, but you are officially, her responsibility now for the next couple of weeks, as far as I'm concerned. And I hope all goes well. Prayers are with you, and good luck with a third baby.
Yeah, thank you.
And we'll see you maybe 3 weeks from now. We're playing it by ear, see what happens with, the baby. And but a reminder, we will be back next week at noon, where I will be joined by Greg Durwart, who will be our guest host for that day. All right?
Cool deal.
So thank you very much, Ben.
All right. Thanks, Ken.
And thank you all for watching, no matter where you're watching. And God bless.
And happy birthday, Sarah.